first call came in around 4 p.m. on May 3rd about a physical disturbance in progress.
Don't have any further other than a male and female. It's all fourth-party information through the front desk at the leasing office.
Around 4:29 p.m., the 4-minute police body camera video begins with an Okaloosa County, Florida sheriff's deputy arriving on the scene.
He was saying that it happens frequently,
okay,
but this time it sounded like it was getting out of hand.
A woman at the complex tells the deputy she heard yells and a slap coming from the apartment 2 weeks ago, but wasn't sure exactly where it came from. Eventually, she directs the deputy to 4th floor apartment 1401, the home of 23-year-old senior airman Roger Fortson, saying the girl who made the call about the physical disturbance sounded scared. At 4:31 p.m., the deputy knocks once without introducing himself. Roughly 30 seconds later, he knocks again twice. A warning, what you're about to see over the next 20 seconds is graphic.
Step out.
Fortson, who appears in the body camera video to have a lowered firearm in his right hand, was shot 6 times to the chest. He survived the initial shooting.
312, get EMS my location.
But was later pronounced dead at the hospital.
My baby was my everything. Roger was my 3rd son.
Let's have a serious, non-partisan, non-tribal conversation about this incident that you're not going to hear anywhere else. Right? Everyone's going to be in their silos and they're going to speak from that perspective, but I'm going to just deal with the facts and not really from a tribal perspective. Try to stick basically with the facts. So if I am left-wing media, I think the impulse will be to jump to racism, right? This racist cop shot a black person, black lives don't matter. Now, in my view, that is potentially half correct. I don't know anything about this officer, but I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that he's just a racist officer looking to kill a black person. However, and ironically or interestingly, this could actually be representative of the types of racism that they discuss in some of these potentially cringe anti-racism type things that you might see in some of these corporations where they talk about racial bias and things like that. Now, just because maybe the way that these things are discussed might be cringe or not in the best way, doesn't mean that there's no merit to what they're talking about. And what I'm getting at is, even though I wouldn't jump to just like, oh, racist white police officer, I could easily see that this airman, and I'm a former Air Force myself, but I could see that he might still be alive today if not for his skin color. Yet I see that without leaning into this is a racist white cop. The way that would happen is, first of all, let me debunk a lot of that stuff. Don't quote me on this, but I don't know that this officer necessarily knew that he was going to encounter someone with brown skin. He certainly didn't have a lot of time to see and size up that he's dealing with someone of that particular race. So from what I saw, he might have only had a second or two to, be aware of the race of the person he's dealing with. So to me, that crushes a lot of the preemptive racism where it's kind of like, this is a black guy, I don't like black people, I just want to kill this guy, whatever. That debunks a lot of that stuff. However, in that second, that's the second that he took to make a decision to pull the trigger, this is where racial bias comes into play. They've done some experiments where maybe they show a bunch of pictures of a bunch of people with different skin complexions and, ask you which person looks more trustworthy or something like that. And they'll see that, many people exhibit some kind of subconscious bias where they will be more trusting of someone with a lighter complexion and less trusting of someone with a darker complexion. Again, many people have this in a subconscious way, so I wouldn't regard that as someone being racist, right? A racist person has a certain negative view about a certain person. Not necessarily negative, but they have a certain view of people based on their skin color, right? So people of this skin color are smart, are dumb, are criminal, are really good at math, whatever it is. Rather than looking at the individual, they're making these sort of prejudgments based on skin color. I I think that is something that is a little bit different from, you know, based on the media you're consuming or whatever your life experiences are, you subconsciously have this prejudice, right? Like, it's not like you wouldn't hire someone because they're black, or you wouldn't be friends with someone. And this is why sometimes people say I have black friends. Not like you wouldn't be friends with someone because of their skin color, or you wouldn't hire them or anything like that. However, instinctually, based on your experiences and based on your internal bias, your subconscious bias, you might actually make decisions that are sort of, negative based on skin color without even realizing it. So, for example, not that you wouldn't hire someone with brown skin, but if you have two people with exactly the same skill sets and everything seems to be pretty much the same, and one has a darker complexion, or not just dark complexion, but someone brown skin versus someone with pink skin, you might go with the pink skin person because you just kind of feel like that person presented better to you, right? So you don't really make the connection consciously that you picked them because of their skin color, right? But essentially that is why you did. It's a subconscious thing. So this officer could be a person who's actually not racist, but he does have a sort of subconscious bias that is based on skin color. I mean, it could also just be purely an accident as well, right? Bad cop, trigger happy, whatever. There's other explanations as well. But if it's going to be racial, it could very well be that the guy's actually not racist, but he does have a prejudice, right? A subconscious prejudice. And in that split second, it's not a lot of time to really think logically or whatever. He's reacting based on instinct. So he opens the door, he sees the gun, right? And then his gut said, threat, I got to defend myself or whatever. I got to take out this threat, and he starts firing the gun. Would that have been his gut reaction to someone who looks more like him? Right? That's more of an argument that I would say might be more based in reality. Unless, of course, I mean, we look into this guy, we find out he's got a track record of any kind of racial, any kind of racism or anything like that, then okay. But I don't have any evidence, and I don't like to jump to that, right? That's the Young Turks model. That's the Dr. Rashad Rishi model, where everything is about racism. I don't want to jump to that, right? It's not that I want to, I don't want to, but I'm not going to, like, I don't base things just based on my feelings, right? So when I'm assessing something, I want to look at the facts, look at the evidence, and come to a conclusion based on that. I don't see anything specifically that has referenced anything regarding race. But the other side of this conversation, so that's the left wing critique. The critique on the right wing is, this guy had a gun legally, right? And there's all this talk about, the Second Amendment, and we support Second Amendment, and everyone should have a right to have guns, and blah, 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 blah. We're pro-guns, whatever, right? Here is a legal gun owner who did nothing wrong. He had someone knock on his door who did not say who they were, right? I assume that's why he went and got his gun, right? I mean, this is what a Second Amendment person would say. I have a gun to protect myself, at my home. I can't depend on the police. So someone's banging on your door and then they're hiding. Okay, let me get my gun, right? I think any Second Amendment person would be like, yeah, of course, right? Then at the end, he does identify himself, right? At this point, I presume he already has the gun out, right? If he had it up, he puts it down, or maybe it was down the whole time while he was assessing. The bottom line is he chose to open the door and not put away the gun. But the gun was aimed down at the ground. The officer was not responding to a situation where, someone was being kidnapped or there was some, gang thing or robbery. It wasn't anything like that. So, with that perspective in mind, you open the door. I'm not going to be an idiot and act like some of the left-wing folks probably will and pretend like it wouldn't be startling for me as an officer to open a door and then a guy opens the door with has a gun out, right? So that would be startling. But as a professional, as a person who's trained, even if I instinctually, grab for my gun because I see a gun, that's one thing. But to actually make the decision to start firing, that's a whole other story. And I would hope that I would have sufficient training as a police officer to be able to make the right call in that situation, which I don't think is to unload your clip on this guy simply because he has a gun out and you're a little bit startled. Now, if that gun starts making any movement at all sort of upwards, things change drastically really quickly. But simply seeing the presence of a gun, that alone should not be enough for a police officer to just start firing, especially when the person's in their own home, right? Um, but here's the thing. All the Second Amendment people, they're not going to be making a lot of noise. They're not going to go and protest and say, this is wrong. We got to protect our Second Amendment rights. And, because think about it. If you're a Second Amendment person, you should be outraged at the possibility that the police could come and shoot you dead. You've committed no crime simply because you had your legally owned gun in your hand. You weren't threatening anyone. You weren't aiming it at anyone. And you end up dead like that. I mean, that should be terrifying to any Second Amendment person. This should be something very personal to them, because supposedly they're very about the Second Amendment and right to firearms and good people with guns, versus the bad guys having guns. He's a military guy, which is supposedly something that these people are appreciative of, right? So he's a military guy. He's not some woke person, although who knows, it's woke military now, right? But whatever, he's a military guy. He's a gun owner, didn't do anything wrong. Now he's dead. But I don't think he's going to get support from the Second Amendment community. And the question is, why is that? Now, if he had a different complexion, let's say, for example, this was a MAGA person who, for whatever reasons, living in a very blue area, right? And the police officer that does this, that kills him in the same scenario, happens to be, they found a social media post of him with like a Black Lives Matter thing or whatever. So you have a Black Lives Matter guy that supposedly was so terrified he just shoots this Trump supporter. Can you imagine the protests and all the social media posts about this is awful and this is whatever and the Second Amendment, blah 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 blah? But I don't think any of that's going to happen in this case. Now I'll leave it to you why you think that is. Why is it that this guy is, in my view, not going to get any support from all of these Second Amendment people? All the talk that they've had, they're not going to have any interest at all in backing this guy up. But again, if he looked different and had different, different setup in terms of the scenario I described, I think there'd be a different response. Again, why would that be, right? I mean, look at Ashley Babbitt, right? Look at the mob that she was involved in, right? Look at what she was doing, smashing through that window, going through that window. Police officer had his gun drawn. The guy right next to her says, he's got a gun, he's got a gun, he's got a gun. And she chooses to go through there. Ends up getting killed by a police officer. And she's gotten so much support, right? A woman who was illegally in the Capitol, who was totally unhinged, smashing through a window, right? Ends up getting shot by a police officer who's defending, the politicians. And she's the one who, this is a travesty, blah, 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 and say her name, blah, blah, blah. These same people are not going to be saying, say his name for this airman that just got killed by the police. I can guarantee you, right? In fact, you're going to see the opposite. You're going to see people defending the officer, making a valid point that, if there's no evidence that this guy's actually racist, then you can make a valid argument that maybe he just got startled and made a mistake. Now, whether that mistake is appropriate for a trained police officer, depending on how much experience he's had, you know what I mean? Because as a police officer, I could mistakenly, run over a bunch of kids crossing the crosswalk, but just because of a mistake doesn't mean that that is not completely unacceptable and worthy of me being, at least fired, if not worse, criminal charges. So I think that's what you're going to hear. The only support that you're going to hear in this situation is going to be for the police officer, right? When a police officer is doing his job defending against a mob and shoots a MAGA person, that MAGA person gets looked at as a victim, and this is a tragedy. Let's go and try to expose the police officer. When a police officer shoots somebody who happens to have brown skin, right? Didn't do anything wrong. He wasn't mobbing the Capitol, right? He wasn't smashing through when it was in his own home, right? This is going to get less interest than Ashley Babbitt. I'll leave it to you to answer the question in terms of why that would be. What logic can you use to explain why Ashley Babbitt would get support and this guy wouldn't, right? Ironically, Ashley Babbitt was also Air Force. She was former Air Force, if I'm not mistaken. This guy's current Air Force, right? So 2 Air Force people end up shot by the police, right? One was committing a crime involved with the mob. She got support. Is this guy going to get support? And if he doesn't get support from these same people, answer the question in terms of why. Because I know right-wing media doesn't like to talk about racism. They love to point out when the left manufactures racism, and they do, right? But when there's actual racism, they don't have any interest in talking about it, right? So that same group of people that spend a lot of time trying to convince us racism is not really a big thing, why is it that they're going to behave so predictably different in these scenarios where the main difference is skin color? And again, it's perfect that the one that they're supporting is the criminal committing a crime who presented herself as a valid threat, right? Of course, they're going to try to, play games and like, oh, she wasn't a threat. She didn't have any weapons. Right. Well, this guy wasn't a threat. He had a weapon. He was in his home. The weapon was down. You're allowed to have a gun. That's not a crime to have a gun in your hand, in your home, especially aimed down. So you're not threatening anyone. You didn't threaten anybody. Let's not play games. This is Babbitt channel. Babbitt in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well.